Word of the Viking landing spread through Northumbria like wildfire. Bells rang in villages. Torches lit the roads, and the people rushed behind castle walls for safety. Inside Dunleaven Keep, Lord Alastair Edmund, commander of the Northumbrian forces, stood over a massive oak table. His beard was trimmed short, his chainmail freshly polished, and his calm eyes revealed experience, not fear. They've landed with at least 12 longships, his scout reported. 300 warriors, maybe more. Alastair nodded. Send ravens to Durham and York. We hold the walls until reinforcements arrive. Outside the keep, the English militia assembled archers with yew boughs, spearmen in leather gambesons, and a handful of mounted knights. Snow began falling lightly, dusting their helmets in white. Winter had arrived early, and it would fight alongside the English. Meanwhile, on the coast, Eirik's men torched the first settlement. Flames roared, marking the beginning of the Viking campaign. The warriors laughed and shouted as they marched inland, pushing through the old Roman road that cut through Northumbria's frozen countryside. Among them walked Leif the Swift, Eirik's second-in-command, cautious and far more calculating than his lord. The English will not fall easily, he warned. This land is not the soft monastery raids of the old days. Eirik ignored the caution. Their courage will crumble when they see our axes. But as the Vikings marched, the snow thickened. The wind howled, visibility dropped, the cold bit deep into their hands and faces. England itself seemed determined to slow their advance. By the time they approached Dunleaven Keep, the fog parted to reveal its towering stone walls, bristling with archers. Torches burned along the battlements. The English were not panicking. They were waiting. Eirik grinned with excitement. This is no raid, he said to his men. This is conquest. But deep inside, even he felt something he would never admit. The English fortress looked far stronger than he had expected, and far more prepared. The sea was restless. Waves crashed like thunder against the longships as they carved through the icy waters of the North Sea. Sky was painted in streaks of crimson and grey, a warning from gods that blood would soon stain the earth. Below, dotted at the front of the largest longship, stood Ragnar, known among his warriors as Ravenborn. Long hair the color of midnight whipped violently in the ocean wind. His beard carried frost, his eyes sharp as the edge of his axe. England lay ahead. Its distant cliffs rose like jagged teeth from the sea, shrouded in morning mist. Ragnar narrowed his eyes. "Regn är dark. Calm. Prepare yourselves. When the fog breaks, we strike." Behind him, 50 warriors tightened their grips on shields marked with runes. The scent of pine tar, salt, and anticipation filled the air. Drums began to beat, slow, steady, warlike, from another longship. Ragnar's second-in-command, Bjorn the Bear, shouted over the roar of the sea. Bjorn, the cliffs of Northumbria. Just as the scout said, Ragnar didn't turn. He simply smiled. Ragnar, good. The English still sleep. Let us wake them with fire. The fog thinned, revealing England's green coast. Peaceful, unaware, quiet, but not for long. The longships cut closer, oars slicing through the freezing water. Seagulls screeched overhead, circling as if sensing the chaos coming. Regn lifted his axe, its blade engraved with the symbol of a raven. Ragnar shouting, "For Valhalla!" The Vikings roared in reply, hundreds of voices exploding like thunder into the morning. The first longship struck the shore. Warriors leaped into the shallow water, with splashing, shields raised. They stormed up the beach, silent and swift, moving like wolves hungry for prey. A small English watchtower stood by the cliffs. Just 2 guards on duty, half asleep, warming themselves beside a dying flame. They never saw the shadows approach. Ragnar's blade struck first, The first guard fell without a sound. The second tried to scream, but Bjorn silenced him with a brutal swing of his shield. Bjorn. Too easy. Ragnar. They were never the target. The castle is, he pointed inland, toward a distant stone fortress rising beyond the hills, smoke curling from its chimneys, peaceful and unsuspecting. The English castle of Kingsworth Keep, their true prize. Ragnar turned to his warriors. Region air. We march within the hour, burn their fields, take their gold, break their spirits. Today, England learns the fury of the north. The Vikings cheered as the rising sun broke through the clouds, a blood-red dawn illuminating their path. The invasion of England had begun. The storm grew heavier as the Vikings formed into their shield wall, their circular wooden shields locking together with a deep thud. Snowflakes clung to their wolf pelts, beards, and helmets, creating a ghostly army that looked carved from winter itself. Behind them, the long, serpentine line of warriors braced their spears and axes, waiting for the order to charge from atop Dunraven's towering stone walls. Hundreds of English soldiers peered down into the white haze. The fortress torches flickered violently in the wind, casting long shadows across the battlements. Archers tightened their bowstrings, crossbowmen unloaded their bolts, and the sound of metal against stone echoed like distant thunder. Commander Alistair Redmond stood at the center of the battlements. His cloak snapped sharply behind him. His gloved hands rested on the hilt of his sword. He looked down upon the enemy not with fear, but with a grim understanding. "They've come to break us," he said to his men. But today, Dunraven does not fall. A distant war horn deep, ancient, unmistakably Viking shook the air. Then Eirik raised his axe toward the keep for Odin. A deafening roar erupted from the Viking lines as they surged forward, boots crunching into the frozen ground. The earth trembled beneath the charge. The English response was immediate. Alistair's sword slashed downward. Archers loose. The sky darkened as a massive volley of arrows rose from the battlements and asked downward. The whizzing sound was swallowed by the wind until arrows slammed into Viking shields, armor, and flesh. Dozens fell. Some continued running with arrows embedded in their shoulders. Others dropped silently, swallowed by the snow. Still, the Vikings pushed forward. Leif the Swift led the front ranks, weaving between falling bodies, his round shield raised high. "Keep moving, don't stop." A wave of crossbow bolts rained down, necks heavier, sharper, punching through shields and leather. One bolt snapped a Viking's spine, dropping him instantly. Another tore through a warrior's thigh, sending him screaming to the ground. Yet the shield wall advanced, step by brutal step. When they reached the base of the keep, the Viking drums thundered through the storm. Men rushed forward carrying the great battering ram, an enormous log reinforced with iron bands and carved with snarling wolf heads on the walls. English soldiers heated pots of tar and oil over roaring fires. Steam billowed and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning pitch. "Defend the gate," Alistair commanded. Vikings slammed the ram into the gate. Boom. The oak doors groaned, but did not break. Again. Boom. Snow slid from the battlements with the impact. The Vikings roared, their voices echoing through the frozen courtyard. Above them, English soldiers tipped the tar cauldrons. "Now," Alistair shouted. A cascade of scorching black liquid poured down onto the attackers. Shrieks tore through the battlefield. The tar clung to armor, skin, beards, and furs, burning deep and slow. Warriors stumbled, writhing, falling into the snow as their comrades tried to beat up the flames. The ram dropped. The shield wall broke. Chaos spread like wildfire. Leif dragged a burning warrior away from the gate, snow hissing as it touched the tar. Fall back, fall back." But Eirik ignored the agony around him. His fury was unshakable. He charged forward, burying his axe into the gate itself. Wood splintered, snow sprayed, his breath came in white bursts of rage. "We break this wall or we die here." But the English answered with more arrows, more stones, more fire. Minutes felt like hours. Bodies piled beneath the gate. Blood soaked into the snow. The storm winds carried the screams upward like haunting songs. When the Vikings finally retreated, stumbling back through the blizzard, Alistair watched from above, chest heaving, armor stained with soot and melted snow. "They will try again," he said quietly. But now they know England is no easy prey. The wind howled across the battlefield, carrying with it a bitter truth. This was not just a siege. It was the beginning of a long, brutal winter war. Dawn crept slowly across the battlefield, a pale, icy light spilling through the retreating storm clouds. The snow glowed orange beneath the rising sun, untouched and deceptively peaceful. But beneath that calm, under the cliffs to the east of Dunraven, death was already climbing. 100 Vikings scaled the vertical cliff face, their fingers digging into cracks in the frozen stone, their axes biting into icy edges. Their breaths came in ragged bursts, white clouds drifting into the freezing air. Above them, the battlements of Dunraven loomed like a sleeping giant. Eirik watched from below, cloak snapping violently in the frozen wind. "Faster," he hissed. "The English guards will change shifts soon. They must not see you." Bjorn stood beside him, arms crossed. "If one man slips, they all fall," Eirik smirked. "Then they must not slip." Meanwhile, inside the keep, Dunraven was waking. Torches flickered along the corridors as soldiers emerged from their barracks, stretching tired limbs, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Some carried bowls of hot broth. Others strapped on armor with slow, weary movements. The previous day's battle had shaken them all. Alistair stood in the courtyard, surrounded by officers as the new day's preparations began. His voice was strong and steady, but his eyes were rimmed with exhaustion. "We hold the walls," he ordered. "No Viking touches this gate. No Viking sets foot inside these halls. Dunraven stands." The men saluted. But deep down, Alistair felt a chill unrelated to the winter air. The Vikings were too quiet, too still, too patient. Something was coming. Up on the eastern wall, 2 English guards walked their patrol, stamping their feet to fight the cold. "God's mercy. Never felt a winter like this," one muttered. "Aye," said the other. "And after yesterday, I'd hoped those devils would scurry back to the sea." He leaned over the battlement to spit into the snow, and froze. His eyes widened. Movement, shadows, shapes climbing the cliff. Sound the horn. He shouted, reaching for his bugle. But before he could raise it, a Viking hand shot up. Axe swinging, thunk, the guard's skull split cleanly, his body collapsing without a sound. The second guard screamed, but an arrow from below pierced his throat. He fell off the battlement, tumbling down the cliff, disappearing into the mist. Eirik's voice bellowed from below, "Climb, climb." They know. The Vikings moved with terrifying speed now, like spiders crawling up a wall of ice. Alistair's eyes snapped upward when the horn finally blew from the western side of the keep. Not the eastern. A false alarm. A distraction. His heart dropped. He looked east. Nothing. Just fog. Snow. Silence. But something in his bones screamed. Danger. Double the guards on the eastern wall. He barked. A lieutenant blinked. "But sir," the horn was go. The lieutenant ran, but it was too late. Eirik's warriors erupted over the battlements with the fury of a winter storm. The first group of Vikings leaped onto the wall, axes already swinging. The English guards barely had time to draw swords before they were cut down. Blood sprayed across the fresh snow, staining it in arcs of red. Alistair heard the screams and sprinted toward the eastern wall, sword drawn, to arm. Vikings. He roared, "The wall is breached." Church bells began to ring across the keep. Soldiers rushed from every direction, slipping on icy stones, grabbing spears and shields as they sprinted to the battlements. The Vikings had already formed a wedge formation on the wall, pushing inward, driving toward the courtyard. Bjorn smashed a guard aside with his shield and turned to Eirik. They're rallying. "We must move fast." "We will." Eirik growled, raising his axe, pushed to the stairs, opened the gate from inside. His warriors roared in unison. They stormed down the stone staircase, boots thundering, voices echoing through the narrow passage. Alistair reached the base of the staircase with a squad of soldiers just as the Vikings descended. He met Eirik's gaze through the swirling snow. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Fire and ice. England and the North. To war-born leaders locked eyes. Then the silence shattered. They collided. The staircase became a vortex of steel and blood. Swords clashed with axes, shields shattered, bodies slammed into the walls. The narrow stone corridor amplified every scream, every grunt, every desperate gasp. Eirik swung his axe downward. Alistair blocked with his shield. The blow split the shield clean in half. Alistair countered, thrusting forward with his sword, grazing Eirik's arm and drawing blood. Eirik grinned. Good, a worthy opponent. Their soldiers collided behind them like waves crashing on cliffs. Bjorn fought his way to Eirik's side. "We're losing men. They're pressing us. Hold the stairs." Eirik snarled. "We only need a few to reach the gate." And some Vikings did slip past the melee, sprinting toward the inner yard. Alistair saw them. If they opened the gate, Dunraven would fall. He pointed his blade, shouting after them, "Do not let them reach the gate." The battle spilled into the courtyard, where blacksmiths, cooks, and young squires scrambled for cover. The Vikings charged like wolves, hacking through anything in their path. 3 of them reached the gate. 1 began to crank the inner mechanism. The gears groaned. The heavy chains rattled. The gate began to lift. Inches. Then a foot. Then 2. Wind howled. Through the widening gap outside, the Viking army roared in triumph. They're opening it. Britain soldiers shouted, "Stop them!" Spearmen and archers rushed forward as Eirik's group continued fighting on the wall above, drawing attention away. It was chaos. Total chaos. The gate rose even higher. Enough for men to crawl under. A Viking tried to slip through and was impaled by an English spear from the side. Another Viking fell to an arrow through the eye. A third continued cranking desperately, but Alistair himself writhed, bloodied sword gleaming. With a roar, he cut through the final Viking, grabbing the chain and slamming the gate mechanism backward. The gate dropped with a booming crash, shaking the courtyard. Silence followed. Brief. Shallow. Because above. Eirik realized the truth. Bjorn gasped. "It's over." They stopped the gate. Eirik clenched his fists, blood dripping onto the snow. "No." He whispered. "No, not yet." He raised his axe to call for a final push, but an arrow struck him in the shoulder. He stumbled, roaring in pain. Alistair appeared below, sword raised. The English rallied behind him, surging like a tide of steel. The Vikings backed away, retreating up the stairs, slipping on ice, dropping weapons as the defenders flooded the battlements. For the first time since landing on English soil, Eirik's men wavered. Bjorn grabbed Eirik. "We must fall back." Eirik's breath came in snarls. This isn't finished. But his men were dying round him. He had no choice. The Vikings retreated over the walls, leaping down the cliffs, screaming as some slipped, others crashing into the snow below. The survivors fled toward their camp, limping, bleeding, broken. Dunraven still stood. Barely. But it stood. Alistair watched from the wall, chest heaving, blood running from a gash above his eye. "Today," he whispered, "England holds." Yet both men knew One final battle remained. One last clash of winter and iron. And only one kingdom would survive it. Night fell over Dunraven like a heavy iron curtain. The snowstorm had settled into a quiet, steady fall, blanketing the battlefield with a thin, ghostly layer of white. The cries of wounded Vikings echoed faintly in the darkness, carried by the wind like distant ghosts. The English defenders watched from the battlements, exhausted, bruised, and shaken, but triumphant for the moment. Inside the keep, torches crackled along the stone hallways. Commander Alistair moved through the corridors with slow, heavy steps. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of responsibility. Behind him, his lieutenants followed, their boots leaving wet prints on the cold floors. They entered the war chamber. Maps of the region were spread across the long oak table coastal routes, forests, Viking landing points. Tokens representing English companies were clustered around the keep. Another cluster marked with raven sigils represented the Viking forces pressing in from the shoreline. A fire crackled in the hearth, but its warmth could not lift the tension in the room. Casualties? Alistair asked. Captain Branford rubbed his temples. We lost 26 men on the walls. Yes, sir. Dozens more injured, but morale is high. The men believe we can hold, and the Vikings. Alistair asked. Branford swallowed. They lost far more. Hundreds, perhaps. Their first assault failed. Badly. A quiet murmur of relief spread among the officers, but Alistair didn't smile. He had seen too many wars to trust moments like this. He leaned over the map and tapped the raven tokens. They'll return. Vikings don't give up. This, he pointed to the failed gate assault, was only their test. The real blow is still coming, down at the Viking camp. The atmosphere was nothing like the grim confidence inside UNRAVEN. It was raw, furious, wounded. Fires burned like small suns across the snowy field. Warriors sat in circles, tending to their wounds, sharpening axes, muttering prayers, or staring silently into the flames. The smell of tar, blood, and wet fur hung thick in the air. Eirik, their leader, paced like a wounded wolf. His hair was stiff with frost, and his cheek bore a burn from the boiling tar that had splashed onto him during the assault. Bjorn stood nearby, grimly silent. They humiliated us, Eirik growled. They rained fire on us like cowards. Bjorn shook his head. They defended their home. That's what warriors do. Eirik rounded on him. And where was victory? We should have taken the gate. Bjorn stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Eirik could hear him. You nearly died charging that gate alone. He pointed toward the rows of wounded Vikings. And 100 of our brothers did die. Eirik clenched his jaw. For a long moment, nothing but the crackling of the fires broke the silence. Then Eirik exhaled sharply and looked toward Dunraven Keep, its silhouette glowing faintly in the snowy darkness. They fought like demons, he admitted, but the gods are watching. They expect more from us. They expect conquest. Bjorn nodded. So what's the plan? Eirik turned toward the sea, where their longships set half frozen in the shallows. We strike at dawn, he said. But not at the gate. Bjorn raised an eyebrow. The cliffs. Eirik grinned. An idea was forming. A brutal, desperate idea. Back in Dunraven, the English soldiers huddled in their barracks, trying to find warmth beneath thin blankets. Some prayed softly, others cleaned their weapons, hands trembling from exhaustion. On the battlements, watchmen walked their routes with torches, scanning the fog-covered battlefield. The sky was quiet. Too quiet. Alistair stood alone at the highest tower, staring out toward the Viking camp. Snowflakes gathered in his hair and beard as he whispered, "They're planning something. I can feel it." He tightened his grip on the cold stone railing. If they come at dawn, we must be ready. And deep in the storm, beyond the glow of the English fortress, the Vikings moved like shadows. Dozens of them scaled the icy cliffs with ropes, axes at bare hands. Snow whipped round their figures, transforming them into dark specters against the white stone. Below them, Eirik watched with fierce determination. Bjorn approached him quietly. "This is madness, even for you." Eirik's eyes never left his warriors as they climbed. "Madness wins wars," he said. "And tomorrow, Dunraven will finally bleed." The storm howled like wolves across the fields. Both armies prepared for dawn. A dawn that would decide the fate of the coast and carve names into history. The night after the failed breach felt endless. Dunraven Keep lay bruised but unbroken beneath a sky smothered in storm clouds. The wind cut through the battlements like a blade, carrying the scent of blood and smoke across the frozen fields. Torches flickered weakly along the walls. The soldiers who survived the morning siege leaned against the stones, too tired even to speak. Commander Alistair stood alone at the highest tower, watching the Viking camp below. Snow fell around him like drifting ashdot down there beyond the broken siege ladders, the frozen bodies, the splintered shields. The Vikings moved slowly, silently, almost ritualistically. Fires burned low, casting long shadows across the wounded warriors who lay on makeshift beds of furs. They looked nothing like the roaring storm that had crashed against Dunraven at dawn. They looked defeated, but Alistair knew better. Defeated Vikings did not retreat. They returned stronger. His breath left his mouth as steam. They will come again. He whispered to himself. One last blow. He turned to the courtyard below, where his men struggled to reinforce the shattered stairway and replace the broken sections of the wall. Their faces were pale. Their hands trembled. The winter had become their enemy just as much as the Vikings. Alistair closed his eyes. The gods of the north won't let them leave without glory. In the Viking camp, Eirik sat alone on a fallen tree trunk, snow clinging to his beard and cloak. His injured shoulder burned with every breath, but the pain fueled him rather than hindered him. Round him, his men sharpened axes, whispered prayers to Odin, wrapped wounds, and buried the fallen. Bjorn approached with two shields under his arms. "You should rest," he said. Eik shook his head. "There is no rest. Not until the Raven banner flies over Dunraven's walls." Bjorn lowered himself beside him. "We lost 300 today. We will lose more," Eirik replied and faced. "It is winter. It is war. The gods demand a price." Bjorn looked toward the keep towering in the distance. Its torches burned like stubborn stars in the night. "And tomorrow?" Eirik's eyes narrowed. "Tomorrow we break the English spirit. Tomorrow we fight not for plunder, but to show them what a Viking's final breath looks like." He slammed his fist into his chest. "Tomorrow we end this." The final dawn sky turned a deep, bruised purple as dawn crawled over the horizon. Snow drifted across the field like a shroud, covering the frozen corpses from yesterday's slaughter. Alistair walked the battlements, stopping to meet the eyes of every soldier he passed. Some had cuts across their faces. Some had blood crusted on their armor. Some could barely hold their weapons. But every man stood tall. "You have fought with honor," Alistair said loudly. "Today, you fight to defend every home, every child, every stone of this kingdom." He raised his sword. "We stand. No matter what comes through that storm, we stand." The men echoed the cry, spears pounding against shields. Then a horn sounded deep, ancient, terrifying. The Vikings marched out of the fog. Not running, not charging, marching. A slow, steady drumbeat followed. Thump, thump. Thump. Eik walked at the front, a giant among warriors. His axe rested on his shoulder. His eyes burned with fire. Behind him came rows upon rows of Vikings' shields raised, wolf-skin cloaks fluttering, boots crunching through the snow. They moved like one living creature, one great beast of winter. Alistair's heartbeat echoed louder than the drums. Positions. He shouted. Archers raised bows. Spearmen tightened. Formations, crossbowmen loaded bolts. The Vikings stopped. Halfway across the field. Silence. Eik stepped forward alone. He planted his axe into the snow and roared, "England, we come for your throne." His warriors slammed their shields in unison. Clang, clang, clang. Alistair stepped forward on the battlements. "This is our land." His voice cut through the storm. "You will not take it." Then he raised his arm. Archers loose. The sky darkened as hundreds of arrows shot through the air. The Viking shield wall braced. Arrows slammed into wood and flesh. A dozen Vikings dropped. Another dozen pressed forward. The charge began. A tidal wave of iron and fury. "Steady." Alistair shouted. Spearmen lowered their pikes. Crossbowmen fired. The Vikings slammed into the English line at the gate like a living hammer. The sound was monstrous, wood cracking, steel clashing, men screaming. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The gate breakspoon swung his great axe, cleaving through to spearmen. Eirik smashed through a shield, grabbed the soldier behind it, and hurled him into the snow. The Vikings fought like men who had accepted death and now sought only glory. The English line bent. Then broke. Vikings soared through the gap, rushing the gate. The door shuddered under the impact. Boom, boom, boom. Reinforce the gate. Alistair shouted. Men pushed beams against it. Others stabbed through cracks. Boiling water was poured from above. But the Vikings kept coming. Bjorn roared again. Boom. And then the gate split. One hinge snapped entirely. Wood cracked, steel bent. The Vikings surged inside like a flood. Inside the keep's courtyard became a war zone. Bodies clashed in every corner. Flames from overturned braziers lit the snow in orange and red. Screams filled the icy air. Alistair fought his way toward the center, cutting down attackers, blood splattering across his armor. He met Eirik again, his storm meeting the storm. "Commander," Eirik sneered, "this time you fall." Alistair raised his sword. "Come claim your death." Northmen. They clashed in a shower of sparks. Eirik swung with raw, brutal power. Alistair countered with precision and speed. Steel rang against steel. Eirik feinted left, struck right. Alistair barely dodged. Alistair slashed upward. Eirik blocked and shoved him backward. Their breath steamed in the cold air. Around them, English and Viking warriors slaughtered each other in waves. It was no longer a battle. It was annihilation. The turning point just as Eirik gained ground, forcing Alistair toward a fallen pillar. A horn sounded from the west. Deep. Strong. Unmistakably English. Eirik's eyes widened. No, not now. Over the ridge, through the blizzard, banners emerged. Blue banners, lion banners, the reinforcements of House Briarcrest. Thousands of English soldiers charged down the slope toward the battlefield. Alistair's men roared with renewed strength. Eirik stepped back, breath shaking. Bjorn shouted from across the yard. "Eirik, we have to withdraw." Eirik's fury exploded. "No, we fight." But the fresh English troops crashed into the Vikings like an avalanche. The exhausted Northerners were pushed back. Their shield wall collapsed. Their wounded fell first. Bjorn locked eyes with Eirik. "This is the end, brother." Eirik looked round, his men dying, his dream crumbling, the raven banner falling into the snow. He lifted his axe one last time. For Odin. He charged Alistair with a broken roar. Alistair met him head-on. Blade flashing. One strike. To on the third. Alistair's sword plunged into Eirik's chest. The Viking leader froze. Snow fell silently onto his shoulders. He met Alistair's eyes. "You fought well," he whispered. Then he fell to his knees, and into the snow. The battlefield went quiet. The surviving Vikings dropped their weapons. The English raised their banners high. Winter's storm was finally broken. Downriver, England, the coast, all stood victorious. Alistair stood over Eiric's fallen body. Breathing heavily, "This land," he whispered, "belongs to those who defend it." Snow continued to fall, not as a curse, but as a shroud for the dead Dot, and thus ended the last winter of the Viking invasion.